Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. Today, we will be talking about what AI actually changes about building a tech team. Before getting started, I wanted to talk about a exemplary imaginary company called Novatech. So, what is Novatech? Novatech is a mid-sized technical company that is growing quick. It currently has 200 engineers, and its leadership started getting a bit interested in AI. They started attending conferences, they looked at presentations, and decided they wanted to go all in and rebrand as an AI first company. So, what did they do? They decided to invest $2 million in AI and fire 50 of its engineers. And 18 months later, they haven't seen any real return of investment. They are actually missing important milestones and their engineers are burning out. So, AI was very promising. What happened? In reality, this is the story of many companies, and a study actually came out from MIT in 2025, and it said that 95% of companies who invested in AI actually are not seeing a return of investment. They're seeing marginal, which has a quick ceiling, or they have no return. So, in this presentation, we'll be looking at ways to avoid committing the same mistake as Novatech and as many as 90% of these companies are doing. And we will be talking about how you can put your company in the right position for meaningful growth. All right. Beforehand, I wanted to give an overview about this presentation. We'll first be going over the assumptions that these companies might have made. And to understand the reality of these assumptions, we'll be going over what AI is, what it's good for, and what it is bad for. Once we understand, we'll be debunking these assumptions. We'll be talking about the new workload that AI creates, and we'll be talking about what skills to look out for. And finally, we'll mention the next steps for your company. All right, before we dive in, I wanted to give a little bit of context behind who I am. My name is Victoria Moran, and I've been studying computer science for 4 years now. I've worked at different companies as a full stack developer, and throughout my time as a student and as an intern, I've had to work on projects with and without AI. So for many of the companies, the current companies, I am the profile that you might be looking for when hiring. So I wanted to give my perspective from this side of the table. So let's dive in. All right, so let's start by looking at the assumptions that Novatech might have made. The first one is I will quickly gain back the money I invested. AI can output code in an extremely fast rate, so that will in turn boost the productivity and efficiency of my engineers, correct? So I will gain back the revenue quickly. The next is I will need less engineers and employees. Because of this quick rate of code, I can just make senior developers do the tasks that my junior developers do, and in turn, I can let go of some of them. That would actually be helping me in financially as well. So why not needing less engineers? The next is AI is the right tool for every problem. You have any problem, just let AI try and solve it. What could go wrong? And finally, using AI is intuitive. As a user, all you have to do to use AI is just give it a prompt and it will give you an output. My employees will understand that. That's very straightforward. So they should understand how to properly use it very quickly. What Novatech truly failed to understand is what AI is before making a strategy to start implementing it. So let's look at the grounded reality. AI is trained by data to recognize patterns. That's basically what it is. It's been trained for years and knows how to recognize problems that it has seen before. It will confidently answer right as much as it will confidently answer wrong. And it will not challenge assumptions. If you give it a certain solution for a problem that you might have, it's not going to question whether or not that solution is the right one for your problem. It will just solve it for you. It predicts, it doesn't reason. Because AI is mostly trained on data, it doesn't really have human judgment, and it will only try to find a solution that is as correct as possible, but it will never be completely correct. It is only as good as what it is trained on. Because AI is trained on data, there is so much that was input into it, and there could be bugs, there could be security risks, who knows what might be in that data, and you are trusting that data to give you an output. You need to understand what it was trained on. Finally, it has no real memory of your project. AI can have a certain amount of context, but at some point it runs out, and most of the time it will only have the context that you give it at that moment. So it doesn't truly have an overarching view of your project. It doesn't have the context of your boss and coworkers. It just knows what it knows in the moment. So now that we know a little bit more about what AI is, let's look at what AI is good for and what AI is bad for. For starters, debugging problems it hasn't seen before. As mentioned before, because AI is trained on a certain amount of data, if it hasn't seen the solution to a certain problem, it's going to have a hard time being able to solve it. It might go through a lot of trial and error before it's able to pick up on a solution or even guess the right solution. AI is pretty bad at big picture thinking. This is because it doesn't have this overarching view. It's very task-oriented and it will only try to solve the certain problem that you give it, but it won't think about how that might affect your whole system. Cross-functional judgment. AI can only solve mostly within its own environment. So if your code base or workflows are in different areas or they're separated, maybe your issue is between those connections, AI will have a hard time being able to find and debug those problems. So it's not the best at cross-functional judgment. The next is understanding and considering edge cases. As I've mentioned, AI is very, very task-oriented. Once giving a task or a solution to a problem, once it makes that solution for you, it's not really going to question whether or not it handles that solution in every single case. It will just tell you it's done. And because it's like task-oriented, it's going to try to find those solutions as quickly as possible, even if it has to avoid certain bugs or try to reroute to get to that solution quicker, which means that it cannot write good scalable solutions. It will sometimes just make a quick band-aid fix. The next is generating maintainable and readable code. During my time as an intern, I've realized that AI's coding style will change throughout prompts, and sometimes it might make a certain file for something or make it embedded in another file. Sometimes it will make components, sometimes it won't. It differs a lot, and so it kind of is bad at creating maintainable code. On top of that, sometimes the code that it does write and the solutions it writes is pretty ambiguous and hard to read for humans. So it's generally bad at maintaining readable code. And finally, it's bad at challenging assumptions. As mentioned before, it won't question whether a solution is the right one, it will just do it. All right, now let's look at which tasks are best suited for AI. So generally, tasks that are best suited for AI are repeatable. They don't use criteria, but solid logic. They're human error prone, and they are usually rule-based and high volume. So, some of these examples include code boilerplate, documentation drafting, creating unit tests, pattern-based debugging and spotting syntax errors, writing CSS styling from a mockup, generating queries, explaining code, and translating between languages and formats. Basically, all the tasks that kind of suck to do. So, now that we understand AI a little bit better, let's return to those assumptions that Novatech made, and let's debunk one of them. Let's look at the first assumption that Novatech might have made when integrating AI. The first assumption is I will quickly gain back the money I invested. The reality is that studies actually showed that there is a hard ceiling at 10% in boost in firm value. From 50% of what AI can actually improve, only 10% of that, and that is being generous, can be boosted. 10% of 50%, that's only 5%, which only leads to a 10% boost in firm value overall. That's not that much. Do you really think they'll gain back the $2 million that they invested quickly? Not so true. The next assumption is we will need less engineers and employees, and the reality is AI does not get rid of work, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it transforms the task. The way I like to think about this is an analogy of a washing machine. Before washing machines existed, someone had to do the manual labor of washing each one and single piece of clothing that you had. And now that washing machines exist, there is less work involved, but there's still work to do. You still have to grab the clothing, put it in the washing machine, put the correct settings, and then take it out and put it in the dryer. It's not the same as manually washing every single piece of clothes, but it's just work transformed. Engineers still have to do some manual labor and ensure that all the code is correct. So the work isn't just gone, it's transformed. The next assumption is AI is the right tool for every problem. The reality is that AI is better at some types of tasks than others. You can think about this as you're trying to implement a map simulator. Are you gonna try to do this with AI, or why not use a tool that has already been created like Cow Maps, Naver Maps, or Google Maps? Why do you have to use AI? It's not always the best solution. Or there might be some AI tool that does help, but you have to look into which tool specifically is better for your problem. The last assumption that Novatech might have made is using AI is intuitive. The reality is that it requires real skill and practice, and this isn't always very straightforward. It requires you to know how to prompt correctly, being clear and giving enough context, knowing when to trust the output, knowing when to use AI or when to use another tool, and being able to understand and validate its code. This one's extremely important because you need to understand what AI is actually doing in order to maintain code and ensure it's doing the right process. All right, so the mismatch between assumptions and reality is where Novatech and many companies end up losing the most. It's especially important to consider that while AI may fasten some procedures, it actually ends up adding a few others. So let's look at the new workload that didn't exist before and now exists because of AI. The first is reviewing and validating AI output and catching confident wrong answers. Next is understanding generated code well enough to own and maintain it. Prompting design and knowing when not to trust the output. And finally, managing new categories of technical debt, derived from AI-generated code. So this is what led Novatech's engineers to be burned out. All of this new workload was created, but the leadership didn't consider this. All right, because of these shifts in tasks, jobs descriptions now have changed, and the same skills that we valued before have now been transformed. So let's look at what skills to look for when hiring. Job descriptions shouldn't optimize for syntax, framework familiarity, or speed output, since these are the things that AI does best. Now more than ever, one should consider hiring someone with strong foundations, such as systems thinking and architecture. This is now very important because AI needs someone that has a critical thinking and is able to lead the project in the right way. And the next skills are more based on their experience with AI. So that includes understanding and debugging AI code output, prompting AI with clear language and enough context, distinguishing between a band-aid fix and a scalable solution, being familiar with AI's strong and weak areas, and finally, knowing which AI tools to use for different tasks. So now that we know more context about AI, finally, let's look at what are the next steps for Novatech and for every company. Okay, so the next steps for Novatech includes not reducing employee headcount, instead transforming and redistributing what tasks they have to do. Running internal AI workshops. I think this is especially important because, as mentioned before, learning to use AI is not completely intuitive. And if you can take employees and teach them how to properly prompt, understand when to use AI, and understand when to trust its output, they can learn how to properly use AI and be more efficient. Stop measuring AI return of investments and cost saving and start measuring it in growth metrics. So as we mentioned the paper before, Harvard Business Review actually found that instead of considering efficiency and this efficiency capping out at 10% growth value, instead you should be focusing on growth strategies such as marketing. And using AI to leverage this can lead up to a double in firm value. Next is to audit where AI is currently being used in your organization and map it against the tasks that AI is actually good at. As mentioned before, AI isn't always the right option, and sometimes some AI tools are better than others. So it's important to consider which AI you want to be using, depending on what your organization's tasks are, and really consider mapping those out to be able to use the correct AI tools properly. The next and final one is conducting code reviews for AI-generated code and establishing standards based on the criticality of what is being built. So AI spits out a bunch of code, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of all of it. But if you establish standards on what code should be reviewed and what shouldn't, you can ensure that critical code is actually reviewed and maybe critical issues are caught. These standards might include not looking at front-end code, but maybe looking at authentication or security more. It all depends on your company. Before moving on to what Novatech's next steps could have been, I wanted to talk about a quick side note of this impending issue that I call the junior pipeline risk. So ever since AI has been coming out, it has been widening the gap between senior and junior developers. So what is happening? Seniors are improving their productivity while juniors are risking not building real foundations in order to ship code quickly. It's important to note that good seniors build their foundation on being juniors and, going through the code and doing those frameworks, doing that code boilerplate, creating those unit tests that nobody really wants to do, but it creates that core and base foundation for who they are today. So it's important to consider that the juniors that you currently have will soon, in a few years, become your senior developers. So please consider building strong foundations for your junior developers. And how can you do this? Well, you can push them and encourage them to create their own features. Be okay with them shipping code a little bit slower and making them feel comfortable asking questions and really going thoroughly into depth when going through code reviews and giving feedback. So, all right, let's look at what Novatech could have done if they implemented AI correctly. So, instead of cutting developers, they shifted their responsibility, and that has now freed up senior engineers and restored team productivity. Instead of assuming AI fluency, company workshops helped employees understand AI better, and now they use it more responsibly and efficiently. Instead of focusing on AI efficiency, the company invested in growth tactics and is now expecting more than double its current value. Instead of deploying AI everywhere, the company is more productive by using certain AI tools where needed. Instead of skipping code review, established standards have caught critical errors before they became technical debt. So Novatech made these mistakes all in good faith. They read a bunch of headlines, felt pressure to modernize, and made what seemed like reasonable bets. The difference between their company and the companies that are winning now isn't the tools, it's the reasoning behind how they use them. And what is true today may not be true in 6 months. This field is quickly changing, so it is very important to stay up to date with all the innovations and new AI tools. At the end of the day, you cannot automate judgment, but you can build a team that has enough of it to use AI well. Novatech's story isn't unique, but the companies that take a step back, think critically, and build intentionally, their stories end up being very different. Thank you.